Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask a hell of a lot of questions. You could also visit us on patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, where you could become a bitter pill. And we're launching new tiers this spring. I'm excited about a couple cool little gizmos and gadgets and items and whiz-bang ideas, which we're going to be talking about with my guest today. Dr. Sharmaine Browne is a doctor of liberal arts at Savannah College of Arts and Design. She has been a professor at CUNY and NYU in New York. Those are both in New York. And she's with us now on the phone. We're going to talk about a couple of big ticket item things today. I'm just getting over being sick, so sentences are not finding me today. Dr. Browne, are you there?
I am here, Abe. How's it going?
Good. Always great to have a friend of the show come back and still be a friend of the show, because I do not play well with others. Hey, so listen, let's catch up. How you been?
I've been pretty well, and I'm sorry you've been sick, but thank you for having me on the show.
Hey, glad you're here. So let's jump into it, man. I mean, I think yesterday's wall speech was a good example of some of what we're going to discuss today. Attention spans, things like that. But let's jump into it. So, you teach college, you teach millennials, you teach students today. So, what are some of the things you're seeing in your class? What are some of the bigger picture things that you're seeing in the world?
Well, one thing I'm seeing in my class is really about what I'm hearing in my class, which is that more and more students are more concerned about their own attention spans, and they are asking me, as the professor, a lot of questions, which I've been trying to answer. But, it's an old conversation. I've actually been tapping this wellspring of conversations regarding our digital world, our digital verse, our changing attention spans, our changing priorities for at least the last decade or more. And students have been interested in it since 2007 at least, since I know. And they are concerned, which I find really interesting. There's this generational assumption on both sides that the younger people think that they're being berated by the older generations. The older generations, we tend to think that our younger generations aren't noticing, but I'm actually finding it to be a little bit in reverse. I'm finding the younger generations are more actively concerned than we have been for the last decade or so.
Wait, you said less concerned or more concerned?
More concerned.
Yeah, and
they ask questions. I have students who, something we had tapped on briefly. Nicholas Carr is my go-to guy when I start having this conversation, with an article he wrote back in 2008, which offends a lot of people at first, titled "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" He published it in The Atlantic, and it turned into a book called The Shallows. And he opens up with a quote from Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And the supercomputer HAL is saying, "Dave, stop, will you?" And then at the end he says, "Dave, my mind is going. I can feel it. And Nicholas Carr kind of launches into this conversation that he can feel it too. He can feel his mind going. Hmm. And he calls it a tinkering. He feels like somebody has been tinkering with his brain. Now, he published this in 2008. He's an older Gen Xer. And he gets into a lot of detail about the changes that he felt in his own mind when he tried to read a book. That his concentration was ebbing, that his mind would start to drift after 2 or 3 pages, which had not been his experience most of his life. And I have to say, I had that same experience around the same time, and I think maybe a lot of Gen Xers might be able to relate to that, because we grew up in a pre-digital world, but right. Then we pretty much fully immersed ourselves in the digital world while we were still young.
Right.
So I think that Gen Xers are primed to be able to kind of feel that difference.
Well, isn't it? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So what were we going to say?
No, I was saying, but isn't that the case though? Where to speak to your point a little bit, isn't that because, straddling those two generations, we actually came up with that whole "there's no safety helmets, mom smoked when you're pregnant" yeah, butter's good for you. Yeah, we were fed.
Butter is good for you.
Yeah. We were fed Tang. Remember Tang? And the pitch was the astronauts drink it in space. It was orange fucking powder. It was just a nice thicker Kool-Aid in a nice jar, and they call it Tang. And they show moon, and so you bugged your mom to get Tang, and so and you didn't get cancer. Although it's probably the same ingredients as a battery. But then we came up with that sort of that last vestige of recklessness. But then because we're used to playing video games and we were kind of marketed to with G.I. Joes and Barbies and everything else, that all this new technology was just sort of marketed to us in the same way. Is that kind of inaccurate to think?
I think that's accurate. And I think that we jumped into the new tech without thinking. I mean, it just seemed fun, and it seemed like an extension of what we'd already been playing with and had been, as you said, marketed to. And I don't think we were really that concerned. I know that when I went and bought my first Mac, I didn't take it back to my dorm thinking, oh, this is going to affect my concentration and my ability to attend to my tasks. I mean, that was the last thing on my mind. It never occurred to me that we would develop the kinds of technological infrastructures which would impact how we think. What Catherine Hales actually, she calls it cognitive styles, that our style of thinking would actually change on a really deep level. And it did, and it has, and it's multi-generational. It's different. We do think differently now than we did 20 years ago. And I think that those differences were only strengthened, intensified.
Well, I mean, this is it just kind of hit me what I was going to with my last question was, and I don't think I finished it because I was kind of half thinking. Well, this is what I do. But isn't it because, like, when I was saying how we came up a certain way and then these things were just simply toys and tools for us, these kids that you're dealing with that say they're concerned, could it be because they feel more isolated because they are buried in their screens? I mean, I know so many of my friends' kids that are getting out of high school, never got a driver's license, never got a car, and didn't until they got to college. And some of them even in the second year college. And I'm thinking, I on my 15th and a half birthday was at the DMV, dragged the old man to the DMV. I'm getting my learner's permit and did all the crap I had to do to make sure I was, my license on my 16th birthday. All right. I've been driving since I was 16 years old. And all my friends, some of them lined up cars the summer before as sophomores working at Baskin Robbins or wherever to make sure they had a goddamn car by the time their junior year started. And now it's just like, nobody cares. I got friends who the oldest boy never got a car. Sister wanted to get a car, right? And the oldest boys getting ready to go to college. The oldest girls, it just seems like they're so isolated because they have these screens now. That keeps them entertained. That gives them the breathing room, the freedom that we were longing for in real life. Gives them like this alternate universe. Is that sort of what you're seeing in class?
Oh, sure. I see that everywhere, and not just in class. I mean, and I see that across generations. I see that in 60-year-olds now, too. I mean, and that's a different expression, right, of a similar tendency, meaning we developed a kind of technology, a kind of interface, a way of dealing with the world, and it's had all these it's expressed itself in different ways along different channels. One expression of it is a diminished attention span. We've gone from being deep thinkers to hyper thinkers. Mm-hmm. Our attention spans are measurably decreasing. Another one is independence. We are less independent individually. And I think, of course, we're going to see that in younger generations because they're not standing in line waiting to get their license and their car when they're 15 and a half anymore, or 15. They're perfectly happy to, put that off until later, until when it's necessary, because they're not physically trying to get out of the house. They're not physically trying to get out into the world because they're doing that through their screens. And then I think, I also think of it in terms of how we're communicating. This has changed really specifically. We're less comfortable with dissent. We're less comfortable with disagreement, and we're less comfortable with gray areas. We're not as comfortable sort of, I don't know how to put it, interrogating each other and remaining friends at the same time. There's a lot of either or. And I think all of these are different expressions of the medium, of the technology that's mediating our lives. We're living through our screens. All of us are, I think.
Well, do you think that's kind of taken away some critical thinking skills more than it has made us more afraid? I got a libertarian guy that's been on the show a few times, and I consider him actually, for a guy I just met in last spring, pretty good friend of mine, good guy. And we don't agree on a lot of stuff. I mean, we agree on a lot of stuff. We don't agree on a lot of stuff. And we disagree online. We disagree on phone calls. He's had me on the show a few times, and we just hash it up. And I don't have a problem with him because, he never calls me names. He just doesn't agree with what I said. It's like, he didn't say, you're bald and fucking dick and I hate your tie. Didn't make me cry. So, he didn't agree with my point. And then he's got his reasons and he's got his facts. And it's just a discussion. I mean, do you think, because that is symptomatic, and you're not wrong. I mean, I think people, they consider a challenge an affront to their character, and it's not.
Yeah, well, that's what's happening more and more. And it's funny that these discussions reach so far back. Neil Postman, the late Neil Postman, who was a cultural critic and a professor at NYU, he used to quote Marshall McLuhan talking about what we've all heard it a million times, the medium is the message. But Neil Postman used to talk about, in reference to that idea, that the form or the medium limits and curates the content. And what I would add to that in my own studies is that we're a very adaptable species. We're highly adaptable. The cliche is that we're not, but we are. We will adapt to the mediums that we're using to communicate, the mediums that are being used to communicate to us, the mediums through which we're getting our information. And as we adapt, our communication styles and our way of thinking adapt too. And we are sort of being micromanaged, or the news that we're getting is being handed to us in these tiny little quick bites and quick clips and quick images. And we don't even have time for introspection. We don't even have time to get into the long conversations. I mean, sure, some of us do on the wall, but even then, you can't see the person. 90% of our facial expressions are conveying what needs to be conveyed to get empathy from somebody else. We don't have any of that. And so, we become sort of, hyper. Our hyper attention makes us hyper too. We take being interrogated as an affront. We take being questioned as an insult. Mm-hmm. We even take somebody who disagrees a little bit as somebody saying something negative about our character, who we are as a person. But I think this is all in relationship to the mediums that we use, the mediums with which we communicate. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can separate them. We do, but we shouldn't. And, going back to what you asked earlier about the younger generation being less apt to individualize, right? Again, Jean Twenge, she did some research and asked the question if smartphones were destroying a generation. And she studied the behavior and happiness of teenagers going back to the 1930s, and she said that she had not seen generational data like she's seeing today in all of that time. She thinks that teenagers and children are more isolated, less social, and so deeply immersed in the digital verse through their screens that, they're being hurt, emotionally hurt. Mm-hmm. And they don't have that same independence. And again, we've got all these different things. Look at, this is a totally kind of tangential example, but helicopter parenting, if we look at that for a second.
Helicopter what? Helicopter what, I'm sorry?
Parenting.
Oh, okay.
We didn't really have helicopter parents when we were kids, and if there was a helicopter parent, everybody knew, that was an overprotective parent. But we didn't have parents, by virtue of being parents, hovering over every single activity of their children. It just didn't happen.
No, it didn't.
Right? But now that is the norm. And in fact, if you're not a helicopter parent, you're leaving yourself open for criticism. I mean, they have a whole website dedicated now to free-range parents. And it was started by a woman who was being criticized for not being a helicopter parent. But what makes being a helicopter parent possible? It's only possible because of our smart technology.
Right.
You couldn't have an entire generation of helicopter parents without the tech that facilitates that kind of hovering. So the ways in which the technology, that Stephen Jones, he's his critic, he calls it technology being liquid. The way in which technology has become so liquid that it's infiltrated every little space, every tiny little crevice of our world is changing everything. It's changing how we think, how we talk, how we behave. It's changing our expectations. And in some ways that might be great, and in some ways it might not be so great at all. How does he put it? I have a quote here from him. Increasingly invisible, yet everywhere at once. Technology is a meta-machine, pervading every aspect of life, leaving us in a place of refuge. It's true. And so it's going to have to express itself in all of these different ways.
Yeah.
Which is what we're talking about.
But this is the thing, though, too, right? We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like you said a second ago, there's a lot that's good, there's a lot that's bad, but then we just don't seem to have any discipline, I mean, we just don't. Everything's about easy. And even if it's dumb, if it's easy, we just try to placate it. We'll come up with an app, or we'll, you know what I mean? Like it just seems, like we just keep creating more of the same problem, and then wondering why we get, the results we've been getting like this the last, not decade, but good 5-8 years easy. Because I started noticing in the grocery store before, road rage is road rage. So you're an anonymous person in a car, you've heard that whole story. So, but you're in the grocery store and someone almost, runs into you. Before you used to nod and smile. Hey, sorry. Now people look at you like you almost killed them, and they'll say something weird, or you're like, okay. And I don't start a fist fight in the grocery store. So I'm like, all right, well, bad day, walk off. But you get more and more of that kind of shit. And you're sitting there going, God damn it. It's like, is it because so many people are used to being behind a keyboard? And like you said a second ago, generations adapt. I mean, shit, I know 75-year-olds that are better at computers than 12-year-olds. I mean, they're in. They know everything. They email. They write code. They do all this crazy stuff. And, so they're dialed in. And so on a general layman use level of your smartphone, for example, those folks are dialed in. They're easily distracted. It's that whole Pavlovian notion. You get tap, 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 and the dopamine triggers and all these things that we've heard get released, right? And so then here we are, a largely antisocial bunch of folks. It's like, even dating. Social media didn't make dating easier, I don't think. You know what I mean? It just made it a little more frustrating. Gave you something to do. You're waiting for an appointment. You swipe through some dating app. But you go through a million people. You meet a couple, maybe talk to a couple, go out with a couple. And it's like, it's just such a frenzy now where it's like a free-for-all. Everyone's got this attitude that, there's always a better deal coming. And you're like, all right, well. Yeah. And I do the same thing. I'm not a victim here. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. We've all sort of allowed ourselves to be mollycoddled by these devices that were supposed to serve us, and then it's almost Orwellian how much we serve them.
Well, what you just said brings to mind 3 different things. I'm hoping I can keep track of all of them to address each one of them. One thing you talked about, Pavlovian, Tristan Harris, who's the sort of Silicon Valley whistleblower, former designer himself, software designer, he has sort of outed Silicon Valley. And, he admitted in an interview and has since started a whole movement that we were preyed upon as consumers.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not simply that we lack discipline, but that we were, in fact, preyed upon by designs. Absolutely intentional designs that were created to addict us. In other words, we could have had access to all the apps we have now and all the conveniences we have now without those dopamine rushes. They did that on purpose, and they did it in order to hook people.
Mm-hmm.
And there are those in the Silicon Valley now who are saying, oops, we really shouldn't have done this. And in fact, Tristan Harris specifically is calling for a kind of Hippocratic oath that software designers he wants every software designer to take, just like a doctor says, to do no harm, that software designers now have a cultural and social responsibility to do no harm, because that was deliberate. So it's not so much a lack of willpower. It would be more like, feeding everybody a little bit of a drug long enough for us to become addicted and then desire more and more and more and more.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really important. I mean, that's something that we can actually regulate with laws and regulations and expectations. And the other thing you were talking about in terms of dating, and also in terms of, people being sort of antisocial in supermarkets, like, oh my God, you just bumped my can in my hand. It's not even, you don't even get hurt to get a dirty look. People's expectations of perfection seem to have increased. And I think that has been cultivated by our like-dislike culture, by our ratings culture, by every time you get in an Uber, you're supposed to give the person a number of stars. Like we're turning into that Black Mirror episode of what's called Nosedive. Have you seen it?
No, I've not. I'll have to watch it.
It's a good one. Everybody has become a micromanager of everyone else's behavior. How bright was their smile?
Mm-hmm.
How sincere was that smile? Did the sincerity match the brightness? People taking a bite out of a cookie just to put it up on social media. And it's this expectation of perfection that's not only totally unreasonable, but realistically totally undesirable.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of online dating culture, I love to quote John Balsar from years ago in the LA Times, Days Belong to Serendipity. And he wrote that in 2002, right? It's my students tell me that you're supposed to stalk somebody before you meet them now. And if you don't, there's something wrong. And I'm thinking, wow, this is really different.
Wait, you're supposed to say that again?
You're supposed to cyber stalk somebody before you meet them?
Oh. Okay.
I mean,
yeah.
This is all new to me. This is a totally different. It would people would be too nervous
mm-hmm.
to meet somebody, talk to them, try and get to know them without having already done a lot of research.
Yeah. No, I don't. I'm surprised when I'm Googled when I meet. So I don't look people up when I meet them. I don't look people up maybe till after a second date. Yeah. I mean, and what I'll do is I'll even say, hey, find me on Facebook or whatever, and I don't want to, dig into their shit. They'll tell me. And it might not even be worth my time to research, because if we have 2 dates, I don't need to spend 10 hours, looking up their credit history. But no, every now and again, I know somebody did something like that, and it's a little creepy, especially dating. It's creepy. I had last weekend I got home from LA. And then, met this chick online, talked for a little bit. We're supposed to go out that night, get some food. And then all of a sudden, she texts me this message. Oh, I can't make it tonight. I forgot I had the da-da-da-da. Okay, and then I got sick. I was sick with the flu a few days. And I shot her a text while I was sick. Didn't hear back from her. And I bet you money she Googled me and found some televised thing that happened a few years back that was, kind of weird. And rather than ask me about it, she's like, "Oh my God, that's so that was so sordid," Yeah. And it's just this. We've gotten into this thing where we think we're going to shortcut things, and we're just taking the adventure. Yeah. We take the adventure out of everything. Before it was that old joke. It used to be sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and now it's crack, AIDS, and Madonna. Right? We've taken the adventure out of everything. There's no.
Yeah. I was really struck several years ago when a very good friend of mine called me with a sort of mournful tone and completely shocked when he realized what he had just realized. He had woken up that morning thinking about an old girlfriend and a book she had recommended. And as he woke up that morning, it was a Saturday morning, he was sort of daydreaming about just momentarily, as we sometimes look at our days, he daydreamed about the day, wandering from bookstore to bookstore, looking for this book, stopping, having a cup of coffee. And then all in a moment, he realized, oh, no, I don't need to do that. I can just Google it. And in this sort of, in this puff of smoke, it just all disappeared, a day. And what struck me and what struck him at the time was that, damn, all of those wandering days, that wonder, for a lot of us, it's gone because we don't go wandering around. We don't bump into strangers. We don't have the unexpected encounter because we're managing everything, because it's all about efficiency, and because everything is so readily available inside of our rooms and our apartments, which, by the way, Ian Forrester wrote about in a book called a short story called The Machine Stops in 1909, when nobody ever left. Like, never leaving the machine became so normalized that when a woman's son Skypes her, by the way, he was thinking about Skype in 1909, Skypes her and says, Ma, there's an outside, let's go. And she's like, what? Like, she's behaving that he's gone out of his mind, that he wants to leave the safe enclosure of living within the bowels of the machine. This is slowly what we're kind of inching toward.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you're saying this thing, and I remember about, God, maybe 30 years ago, me and a buddy were up in Berkeley, and, we'd dropped a half hit of acid, and we're just wandering the town, and up by UC. And there was this really cool record store called Rasputin's. It's gone now. And big store, books, everything. And so I walked in, and he was, I don't know, we were tripping. So I don't know what he was doing. And yes, folks, I mean tripping on drugs and illicit narcotics. So I got a bug up my ass because I love the monkeys, right? And so I had a pen in my pocket. I didn't have any paper. So I went to the register and asked the guy, hey, can I have a piece of receipt paper? So I sat down and opened this monkey book I found, this big-ass monkeys book. And I went to the back, and I added up all the songs that Mike Nesmith wrote, because I was a big Mike Nesmith junkie. I liked the First National Band. I liked everything he did. So, because I wanted to have some credibility for my argument, why the monkeys were real, And because when you're fucking 26, 27, that shit matters. Screw Nicaragua. Did Mike Nesmith really write that? But I added up the percentage, and it turned out to be 27%. He wrote 27% of the monkeys material. And you talking about your friend realized that that afternoon took me maybe half. I don't know. I was high. You couldn't do that again. You couldn't do that anymore. It would, if someone saw you do that, they would just, dude, look it up on your phone. Siri, ask, it would, Michael Nesmith, born in Fort Worth, Texas, and it would tell you how many songs he wrote and the percentage, right? Those days are gone. And you know a lot, and you have committed a lot to memory. You've got a sponge memory, which is a gift. But how many times have people asked you, well, why do you remember that? Like, not how do you remember that? Why do you remember that? Like, I don't know. I read it, and there it is. Or I saw it on a documentary, and there it is. It's almost like it's a waste of your time. You could just Google it. But then I'm talking to you, and it wouldn't come to me just like that. Now, I need it just like that. I don't want to Google it. You can Google it. You want to say I'm wrong? That's cool. But I don't need to fucking Google it. I already know it. That's the thing that is lost on people. Like, nobody seems to care that they don't know, and they're okay not knowing. And I said this earlier today with another guest. It's just, there's not an old expression, but, corporations, the American public has a short memory, but corporations, they never forget. And that's why when people keep saying, oh, you're such a cynic when you say history repeats, we're about to go into fucking Venezuela after having employed the same failed strategies in Syria, Libya, and Iraq, and Afghanistan. And not only that, but employed the same failed strategies that the Russians and the Turks employed in Afghanistan. Nobody seems to remember that, and it was just a few short years ago. We turned Libya into a failed state with slaves and everything, and now we're going to go into Venezuela, right? And they look at me like I'm fucking crazy. Oh, I guess their socialism idea is a good idea for you. they're not really socialist government, and it's none of our fucking business. They elected the guy. Aren't you asking yourself, why aren't you thinking critically? Why aren't you asking yourself some questions like, if he was such a goddamn dictator, why is that dude still alive? Why is Wido still alive? Why has he not been arrested? If Nancy Pelosi stood up in the House and said, I'm declaring myself president of the United States, we have somebody who's imbalanced and I'm going to be president. And then all of a sudden Russia and China and everybody says, yes, we agree. Yes, you are now president. That is not even sensible. But because we got people staring at fucking screens, right? I don't know. I mean, I rattled off several different things from the monkeys to Venezuela. So that is what kind of is what it is.
Well, I mean, too, that we have to keep in mind, right, that our relationship to our various technologies continually changes us cognitively. But, it's funny that you say that. What I'm thinking about is it changes our memories. In Nicholas Carr's article, he talks about something. It's kind of funny. It was well known at the time, but I've noticed ever since he published his Google Making Us Stupid, a lot of people cite the same particular example, which is that Socrates warned us against the use of pen and paper, of writing things down, because it would negatively impact our memories, because we would no longer rely on oral storytelling. Mm-hmm. And true, yeah, he did warn against that. But the thing is, it is true. It did affect our memories. In other words, our memories are constantly being shaped by the tools that we use. And we tend not to think of technology as a tool anymore, but that's what it is. Technology is an extension of us, of our species. We've used technology since the beginning, and we've become more and more dependent upon it. And that's too bad. It is too bad, because it is nice to be able to tap your own mind for the information rather than having to tap a stream. By the way, Outer Limits years ago in the 90s had an episode about this called The Stream. Mm-hmm. To tap the stream for all the information. Because if you have to constantly look it up, you don't even know if you can necessarily trust the information, especially that it's streaming information. Mm-hmm. It's not even peer-reviewed information. Note that even in our digital age, our peer-reviewed information, meaning stuff that's been rigorously fact-checked and work that's been overlooked by other experts in the field, is still not available readily.
Right.
You still have to go deep into databases within libraries and universities to tap that information.
100%.
The information. But we have all this other information, and we're losing our sense of being able to tap our own minds for it. But this has been happening throughout. It goes back thousands of years. I mean, even a professor of mine, the generation before us, he used to like to take us to the pub when we were in grad school, and we'd play a game and it involved memorization. It involved identification, like name that tune, mm-hmm. only it was name that poem, mm-hmm. or name that passage. But a lot of us, though we could identify, we didn't have that stuff committed to memory ourselves. So from that generation, it changed. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. We're constantly trading off, and I'm reminded of Prometheus, right? In Aeschylus's play, a friend of mine once told me this years ago, and it stuck with me forever. In Aeschylus's play, talking about Prometheus, Prometheus is the one who made us humans in Greek mythology, loved us so much that he didn't like seeing us all kind of wandering around lost in the mud,
right,
in the dark. So he stole fire from the gods to give it to us.
Right.
In the play, Aeschylus's play, he's asked, so what was the trade-off? Because you can't give something away for free. And so the trade-off was, we got fire, but we had to give away our foresight, which was our ability to foresee our own doom. And I'm always very interested that even in our earliest literature, our thoughts about technology involve giving something up.
Well, because we're not sophisticated. Well, no, listen, this is the thing. We're not sophisticated. We're just not. We want and have wanted the same things for millennia. I remember about 25 years ago, a while ago. I was skating on Venice Beach. I used to do this route when I was living in LA, where I would go all the way from Abbott's Habit all the way up to Will Rogers Beach. Right, it was like about 6-7 miles one way, and then I'd skate back down. Dude, I'd take it all morning, and I'd bring a sandwich with me. One day, I was up past Santa Monica at the beginning of Will Rogers, where it starts to get kind of deserted. And I'm passing by this guy, and he's sitting on a park bench, and he's got this fancy pants bike. And he's got all the fancy pants bike gear. And he's wearing the shoes, and he's got the helmet, and everything. And he's screaming into this phone, and at the time, it was a way more expensive phone than I had. And it was about 98, about 20 years ago. Because I remember I had just traded up my first trade-up on a phone. And he screams into the phone, "But you said you loved me!" And it hit me like a fucking ton of bricks. I go, you know what? If I got some archaeologists, I bet we could find that same thing scribbled on a caveman wall somewhere. Right? With with dinosaurs and and the chick rejecting him. We've been doing this shit for fucking years. Shakespeare's Shakespeare because it works. we are humans. That's it. It doesn't matter what kind of shoes we get, what kind of running shoes we get, what kind of ergonomic chairs we have, what kind of macro fiber, fake meat, good for you, tastes like meat diet we have. If you got fucked up as a kid, you're gonna have to deal with some real human shit. I just read this piece on Cary Grant the other day. His daughter's putting out a book on him. I guess he died when she was like about 20, his only daughter. And he had a hard time coming up. You're 10 years old. You get told your mom dies. And then you're 31. You found out that your alcoholic father who deserted you by your late teens had committed your mother, told you she died. You find out at 31 that she's still alive in a sanitarium. You go visit her, and they're like, "Yeah, she can't get out. She's out." No desertion issues there. Wonder why he was married 5 times and had a ton of affairs, and not a very husbandly guy, right? There's all kinds of issues there, and he was rich and he was good looking, and talented. Doesn't matter. We all have these things, right? So it's like. So what when you go back to Prometheus, for example, it's why the Bible is the number one selling book in the world. It's not because, it's doing anything earth shattering. It's just story. And you know what I mean? I want to speak to something you said a second ago, though. Kind of get us back on track. Well, my fault because I rambled. But so you made a point a second ago on how to find peer-reviewed anything. You got to dig before you find that. And now to piggyback on a point you made a little bit ago, how easy it is for people to be offended and to feel like it's an affront, right? Just to challenge their fucking little opinion. Can it be that it's so hard to find peer-reviewed stuff because we're in that space where people confuse fact for opinion, right? They just think, no, I believe it. I had a guy the other night telling me, no, we are the best democracy in the world. I said, can you prove that to me? Well, no, I have faith. Because you look at other countries. Where else would you want to live? I can name 11 places. I probably wouldn't move there tomorrow, but I could name up a ton of places where I got fucking freedom. Is that your point? Because, I got faith that we're not as bad as you say. Right? We're probably not as bad as I think, but I got a lot of facts to tell you that we're not living up to our ideals. It's emotionally and intellectually dishonest to tell me that we have a Declaration, Bill of Rights, and the Constitution, but it's okay to gut habeas corpus. It's okay to gut posse comitatus. Why do you think Trump was able to send soldiers down to the border last fall? His own personal police force. Why? Because Obama gave the gun to the baby. Obama gutted posse comitatus in the NDAA in 2011, which prevents the president from turning the army into his own personal police force. He had to declare a state of emergency to send the fucking army down to the border. Didn't need to. Why? Because I want to send him down there. Because he can. Because there's no more posse comitatus. So that's a fact. That's not the Abe Gazette. And the result was Trump sent an army that cost, I think, like $25 million or some ridiculous amount of money to deploy those guys for a few days for an election stunt because he can. Because legally he can. Right? And so is that, do you think, kind of back to my original question, do you think that a lot of this challenge to find peer-reviewed material, for example, because there's a lot of good independent sites out there, like Mint Press News is good, Truth Dig is good, there's Gray Zone is good, where they are actual real journalists and they do they do fact check and they do clear it with legal and they make sure that they're telling you as much of the truth as they can, kind of thing, as opposed to Ben Shapiro, who's a half-wit pseudo intellectual who tells half truths, but he talks really fast and he thinks he's really smart. And I know I just pissed off a ton of people right now. I could give a shit. And by the way, I've been trying to get him to come on my show, and his people keep saying they'll get back to me. But maybe it's because I'm so charming. But isn't it that issue though with people being so?
Well, I'm trying to think through it. I mean, I didn't have the answer right away when you asked, and I've been sitting here thinking about it. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that true peer-reviewed work is generally not married to advertising. That's one reason we don't have as much access to it. Another reason, and there are different tiers of peer-reviewed research and peer-reviewed writing, of course. I mean, so many different tiers, it's unbelievable. I mean, you've got more like trade-type work, and then you have journalist-type work, and then you have philosophical, scholarly type work, you have scientific data. But all of it mostly is not married to or beholden, I should say, to advertising. That's one reason. Another reason, I think, and this is probably hard for us in the 21st century to accept, but most peer-reviewed work doesn't, well, I don't know if I want to say doesn't have an agenda. Maybe I'm wrong in some cases. And I'm not going to say it's all objective because it all isn't. And I'm not going to say it's all correct because it definitely isn't. But there is an earnest approach that is looking for or searching for what the writer or researcher believes is truth. And that simply doesn't have a lot of cachet right now. So, when you've got people, they're trying. I mean, maybe they're wrong, maybe they're not, but they're just, they don't have somebody generally behind them giving them a lot of money to make this happen. So that also would make access difficult. And the third part of it, I'm trying to figure out what my answer to that would be. I don't know what my answer to that would be. Is that a lot of this stuff is buried in specialized journals that no one's ever going to have access to. I mean, is that because it's not a moneymaker? Maybe. I'm not sure.
Well, it would have to.
Because it's
I'm sorry.
Buried in like some kind of, tower of knowledge. Perhaps that's part of it too.
Well, wouldn't that have to take upon the writer themselves to just get it out there? I mean, no one's owed anything, right? I mean, you got to get it out there. If it's important to you, I mean, start your own blog or do something, but get it out there and cite the sources and have a little footnote at the end. So-and-so is a professor at so-and-so and, studied on this and da-da-da-da, and to give some credibility to the piece. But, to just leave it buried at the, Ohio State University, hall of whatever, that's not really service. Right. That's not really
and I think that's happening more and more now. I think a lot of people are trying to circulate. I mean, TruthDig, you mentioned TruthDig. Chris Hedges is a great example of that. Mm-hmm. There are people who are trying, who are putting thoughtful news out there and thoughtful critiques out there. And I think more and more thinkers, scholars, activists are trying. But on the other hand, too, some people's hands are really tied. It's interesting to keep doing that research. You need to be funded. There you go with the money. Mm-hmm. And to be funded, you have to publish in some of those obscure university presses. Otherwise, you're going to be out of a job.
No, I get that. It's publish or perish. I understand that part.
Yeah. So, but it's too bad because I think some of that research should be more publicly available. I don't think people should have to go digging into databases to get access. But that's what they need to do.
Well, but it would be a good idea. Wouldn't it be a good idea to just up that in the search engine? You go looking for something. Unless you put it in quotes, you get all this crap ahead of what you're really looking for, right?
Yeah, you do.
And it's kind of frustrating. And so I think a lot of people with a shorter attention span, I mean, people don't read anything, even online articles. Like I'll read it takes like 2 minutes. They just read the title and just spout it based on the title. And you're kind of going, whoa, hang on a second. And I'm as guilty of sloganeering as the next person, especially online. Because it's just easy. It's a soundbite. But if somebody asks me to explain it, I can explain it. This is where a lot of folks are today. I watched Barry Wise on Joe Rogan a couple of weeks back. You know who she is?
No.
She's a New York Times reporter. And I'm sorry, she's a fucking idiot. She is endemic of the press completely. Just so used to spouting off talking points. And Joe Rogan should get a sainthood. If he could do a couple of card tricks, I'm going to write the Pope and see if those don't count as miracles, because the fact that he didn't reach across the table and just choke the shit out of her was amazing to me. Because she just said something stupid about Tulsi Gabbard. Oh, she's monstrous. Oh, really? She's been on the show. So, how's she monstrous? Oh, well, and she melted down on his show. It was about a 15-minute meltdown. She kept asking his engineer to Google things for her. It's like, no, New York Times reporter. That comes with some cachet. You should know your shit at the top of your head, like at your fingertips. And this is who is the media today. Opinion for fact, spouting off talking points, getting a pat on the head from their bubble. You said it a second ago. People don't step out of their bubble anymore. They do it online, and then they find people that think just like them, and they're offended by any challenge. And I don't know, are you...
Well, confirmation bias is becoming a bigger and bigger problem, too.
Wait, say that again?
Confirmation bias. Well, confirmation bias, right, this tendency that we all have to see what it is we're looking for. Right. I feel like now we also look for what we want to see, and we look for those who we want to hear confirm what we already believe. So, and you have to have so many different filters in place to avoid doing that, to actually... To keep looking fresh. For example, when I assign a research paper, I ask my students to stay away from committing to a thesis at the beginning of the research process. Whatever their thesis is, I ask them to turn it into a question. And then I ask them to please follow that question into the research. And then as they come out of the research at the end of that journey, then they can revisit that question and figure out, okay, what is my answer? This is my statement after a great deal of research, critical thinking, and interrogating their own research, their own assumptions, Because, and this is not what we're not seeing in the media, this is what we're not seeing even among each other. We're no longer following these questions. Instead, we're looking for those who will confirm our predetermined answers, and that is a severe problem. I mean, how do you think critically if you're not willing to step back and say, I mean, the question mark is just greater than the period, in my opinion. It's important.
It's everything.
And it is. It really is. But yeah, again, we don't have mediums that are conducive to this kind of slow illumination and critical thinking. I mean, when I say slow, I don't mean we have to sit there for months contemplating some issue. I mean, a few minutes.
I'm staring at my navel again.
I don't know. It's really...
No, but finish your thought, though.
It's profitable, though. It's profitable. This is profitable for companies everywhere. To keep us on our toes, to keep us in this sort of rapid-fire, hyper-attentive state, to dissuade us from deep thinking. And I don't know if we've already talked about this. Our brains are already scaffolded, pre-programmed from hunter-gatherer time for hyper-attention. This isn't just new. This is a return to something more ancient. We were all hyper-attentive thinkers in the early stages of the species, because you had to be hyper-attentive to survive in a hostile physical environment. And before civilization had really adapted itself to our survival, everything was hostile, nasty, poor, brutish. It was cold. We didn't have ways to protect ourselves yet. So we were all hyper-attentive. That scaffolding, that neural circuitry in the brain evolved first. Deep attention only comes way later. And deep attention comes almost as a kind of a privilege of our cleverness as a species to survive, thrive. And in fact, I mean, I wonder, I haven't read this, but I'd be curious to see what anthropologists would think about that technology initially made deep attention possible. And now our technologies are making hyper-attention reemerge again as the preferable way to think. So in other words, we're mirroring our technologies as opposed to our technologies mirroring us, which I find fascinating.
It is, but then, I do employee benefits. That's my day job, right? So every twice a year, if I stumble in on the wrong day, I got to sit through the sexual harassment film or something, which is hilarious. If you haven't seen one of these, by the way, it's like watching one of those 8th grade sex ed videos. And you can't believe that grown-ups actually say this shit, but they got to show this film. Okay, people, don't compliment her on her skirt, and her bottom. You're like, really? I got to know that? It's like common sense, I think. But there's a...
One would think.
One would think, right? Or a guy's got a centerfold in his cubicle. This is art, man. Okay, what shit like that. I mean, level dumb, like you can't believe. And then, they'll show this safety video, which is why I kind of brought this up. And the safety video is, okay, ladies, when you're walking to your car, don't just be idly texting while you're walking to your car.
Sure.
Right. and so it's that hyper attention that you're talking about, which used to get us through lions and tigers and bears, oh my, back in the caveman days, other cave people or whatever. Now it's just like that screen has got you within 5 seconds. I got a buddy who does physical fitness. He's got a reset your body program, and he's been on the show before. And phenomenal food and drug stuff. I mean, really just insane theories on that, and subsidies and things like that. But we were talking about that very thing, and he said, I challenge my clients to not touch your phone for 15 minutes when you wake up in the morning.
Oh yeah.
Don't touch it. Don't look at it. Don't check anything. Just sit by yourself. Lay there. Think about your day. Pray. Whatever it is you do that first. Then open your phone. And
absolutely.
And people grown-ups. It's like you're taking cigarettes away from people. They a lot of them take a month to finally get to a point where they can do it for 15 whole minutes.
Well, that's why. I mean. One thing I think is fantastic is that there is a screen time app now, at least on most iPhones, so you can actually gauge how many hours a day you're tapping your screen, how many you can set limits for your social media. And I've been challenging my students to do this, to limit their screen time. They're really into it. And we've also talked about how to increase our focus. And people have talked to me about their experiences, which are okay. And Nicholas Carr, again, he wrote a follow-up article not too long ago, a couple of years back, about this. If you really want to be able to focus on something, turn off your phone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but it's not enough to turn it off. You actually have to turn it off, power it down, not just click it off, but power it down. Physically walk it into another room, close the door. Your focus will increase threefold. It's unbelievable if you just try it. But people don't want to try it because we have these intimate relationships with our technologies now. They're like our little buddies. I'm dreading the day when they design little avatars that are acting as phones, and we make them into little animal pets that sit on our shoulder. I mean, I don't...
Oh, it's coming.
We're way too invested in it. Way too invested.
It's coming. Oh, that's the way they want it. The cigarette business got fucked. So they're trying to find something to make you...
To replace that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like that Chris Rock joke. They're never gonna cure AIDS. Never going to cure AIDS. Don't get your hopes up, because they're still mad at the money they lost over polio. And... same deal here. The addictive people, the sugar people, the nicotine people, the fats and butter people. Ray Kroc is spinning in his grave right now that McDonald's sells salads. It's just like, the fuck? Salads? No, we just do goddamn cheeseburgers and hamburgers and fries. That's it. And we don't. Now we do everything. And because people's tastes change and everything else, you said something. a second ago, I want to piggyback on a guest from earlier. We were talking about if the world would, if the markets would just focus on what was good. And this isn't some like airy-fairy idea, right? Like, like I want a pony. But instead of all the money we spent on bombs and defense, why don't we pay Tyson Foods to airlift some chicken to starving places?
That would be good.
Right? I mean, it was same deal. Who's going to pay for that? Well, you don't ask who's going to pay for the fucking bombs that Raytheon sells us, right? Who's going to pay for that? You don't ask us who pays for the planes. Same deal. Instead of having the rest of the world hate our guts because we do a bunch of fuckery, how about, oh, wow, they're actually not tricking us this time. They're going to give us some food. Nice. We have so much, and we have so much surplus that we actually destroy as to not offset certain commodity markets. Why not just subsidize those companies that way instead of the bullshit tax breaks they get to ship our jobs overseas anyhow? How about we do that, right? And same thing with these technologies. Instead of trying to get us addicted to more shit, how about getting us addicted to, I don't know, looking up a new word a day? Because for all the...
Yeah, looking up a new word or finding, a way to actually participate in making the world more sustainable. Almost every person I have met in the last several years, almost every single person has complained about one thing. They want to do something good for the planet, for the world, for somebody, and they have no idea how. Mm-hmm. Now, if they could harness the power of our smart technology to enable people to empower themselves to do good in the world, that would be cool.
Right.
And that's possible. It's not pie in the sky. It's not crazy. It's totally possible. If they can addict us all to our phones, they can actually allow us to enable our own sort of better selves. That's not too much to ask, I don't think.
No, and it's not I want a pony either. It's perfectly reasonable to take a certain to take a certain thing and switch the direction for something more positive.
Absolutely.
It's not. If we got money to subsidize goddamn bombs and airplanes and paying troops, to risk their lives for corporations, well, fuck it. How about we take the same money, subsidize a different set of corporations, subsidize an entirely different economy, pay for a bunch of vegetables to get somewhere, right? Or pay some, or subsidize the Peace Corps to get more guys who want to volunteer. They're not worried about getting shot at because they're actually teaching people, how to take arid land and make it not arid. I'm not a botanist, but, just stuff like, just something different instead of the same old shit over and over and over, and then wondering, well, gee whiz, why are these refugees coming over from so-and-so? I don't know, maybe because in 2009 we arrested the president of Honduras in his fucking pajamas, he was democratically elected, and we hosed him, and now we got a goddamn drug dealer and his fucking brother running the country, and they're killing people. Maybe that's why, right? So, I don't know. But, hey, listen, so we're wrapping up here in the next little bit, but is there, first of all, thank you for coming on, because you're awesome, and I appreciate you, sharing your hard-fought wisdom and knowledge, because you make me sound smart when you come on the show, so that's good. And then, is there anything you want to push? Is there anything you want, a link you want to share, or something you want to guide people to? I could put in the body of the description of the show.
Oh, well, you know what? I really support the research of Nicholas Carr. That's something I would love more people to look at. And maybe, yeah, I'm working on my own stuff, but I will let you know when that's ready to go. I have a few things I would like people to check out, but they're not quite ready yet.
No, that's okay. Well,
my own.
Well, that's cool, and that's why we would like to have you come back. And when you're ready, we could talk about more stuff and go from there. So, but folks, in wrapping up, my guest has been Dr. Sharmaine Browne. As mentioned earlier, she is a professor of liberal arts at Savannah College Art and Design. She's been our guest this afternoon. Again, you could always visit us at patreon.com/thebittertruth and become a bitter pill and get some freshly toasted bumper stickers for the meantime, and then look for more tiers coming. You can also listen to the shows on all platforms. We're on Podcast Addict, iTunes, and all the usual suspects. So whatever your fancy, go ahead and tickle it. I would appreciate that. And that's about it, man. So listen, if some of this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.